All right, everybody. This is Trevor here. Welcome to the fourth episode of Four Mortal Coils. We are here to discuss all sorts of things that wrap around one particular topic, as vague as it gets, but I think it'll be interesting. It is aesthetics, art, architecture, all things in between. They both start with A. That wasn't helpful. But we are here today to discuss aesthetics with myself and my three friends here, the ones that just the other three coils, I should say. And we can go ahead and start introducing ourselves and saying how we feel about it. I should probably preface this with exactly why we chose this topic over anything else. And I think the best way to do that would probably be to let Steven speak, because this comes from one particular coil. Steven himself, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wouldn't give myself all the credit. It came out of a conversation between me and Brayton. I believe Brayton even started this ball rolling by posting some pictures of some brutalist architecture.
The McDonald's
but in any case,
rant.
The McDonald's rant. That's right. But in any case, welcome to Four Mortal Coils, my fellow hominids. It's nice to be here
what
again.
Did you call me?
A hominid. That's what you are. We're here to talk about aesthetics. We're here to talk about specifically certain things like, do we feel like we live in a world that is getting less aesthetic? In other words, is it insulting to the eyes even? Or are we getting in a world to where it's more aesthetic? Or is it more or less not changing all that much? I'm sure that much discussion will ensue.
All right. Well, after that, you know what? Brayden brought this up. I'd love to hear exactly how he felt about Mickey D's, McDonald's.
Yes, and I'm sure we will absolutely get to that in this episode. I've got many rants about aesthetics. When we did Philosophy Club, actually, every once in a while, I guess we had a conversation about aesthetics, but I think it was one of those things that we saw as
once a quarter.
Yeah, it was one of those topics that was so... I'm just going to use the word subjective, that
or broad.
It perhaps was not the most interesting topic, but I think we're really going to find something now that, and like you said, Stephen, because of it being broad, I think now that we're trying to pinpoint different things in aesthetics in this particular conversation, I think we'll have a lot more of an interesting time. Or at least that's how I remember all of those events. Anyways, I am somebody with a bone to pick, several bones. In fact, an entire Smithsonian museum of bones to pick with many different entities of the modern times as far as aesthetics concerned, from architecture to art or music, you name it. I've got the bones, and I'm ready to pick them.
Well, Brayden, with his beautiful bones, his beautiful self, we're going to leave him there. I want to hear what Tanner has to feel about this. I'm very curious how Tanner feels, because I feel like he could go either way here.
I as well.
Based off of the explanation of the topic Stephen gave, we've come a very long way in the last, let's call it 200 years of architecture. Focusing on the United States specifically, most construction used to be done by, skilled tradesmen, people in guilds, people who have been doing work for 20, 30, 40 years of their lives. So people who treated like bricklaying and stuff as actual art. And while cost wasn't quite the same then as it is now, we have trended in that lovely capitalist mindset to start constructing more for less. And I feel like, compared to the more artistic construction that you can see in older buildings, like even the real general use ones as compared to now, like take an apartment building in like 1890 compared to 2019, I feel like we have dropped off with that artistic expression and that general sense that we should build something pleasing to the eye in favor of going with the lowest bidder and the cheapest construction possible to suit the need and nothing more. So I do believe we have a drop-off in aesthetics as far as stuff like that's concerned.
We will have to compare the utilitarian argument to the aesthetics, Brayton. I'm wondering how you want to reconcile those two.
Oh, I'll reconcile them.
All right.
It's got his bones out. Be careful.
I will
Maybe
say
that's
I
a
do have
good
a bit of a
first place to jump off in. Like, how do we reconcile, the idea that we can produce a bunch of cheap housing, for example,
I'm
or
not
even cheap
commenting
music?
on whether it's good or bad. It's got its purposes. I mean, it's
What do you
just the
think, Trevor?
natural order of things. I mean, it suits the needs, but I do believe that this trend is unfortunate.
I might offer a bit of a contrarian viewpoint. I totally hear what all three of y'all are saying, and I do agree. Whether it be brutalist architecture, which I mean I hate as much as the rest of you, or the degradation of our McDonald's. It used to be so aesthetic. These '90s GameCube McDonald's, all of a sudden they're so brutalist and they're so awful. It tears at my heartstrings. It really does. But I think it has something more to do with the full expression and the full ability to express yourself in any way that you want now, compared to the way it used to be. I mean, look at and now I'm only speaking in terms of architecture, but it could really be about any form of art and art expression. Because you used to be so confined by the materials you have before you. You could express art in so many ways with water, different forms of color, whether it be like color based in water, color based in oil, so on and so forth. You were confined to that kind of color, and you were confined to what kind of buildings you can build based upon the fact that you had to have buttresses in order to have a working cathedral. We were confined, and now that we're unconfined, anything can happen. And a lot of those anythings are, to at least the four of us, disgusting and just ugly. And so I think what we have is the wettening of the spirit and the growth of what art can be into many different things. And I think that is, by its nature, going to sometimes be disagreeable. Like it's one of those things that's just like a natural after effect of just when things get easier. You just have new ways of just things. And I think that's
Are we
what
going
we're
to touch
saying.
on the what is art conversation, or?
Oh man, that'll never end. Oh my God. This is one of those things, because if you ever wanted to talk about consciousness, you have to first define consciousness, and then you'll never get to talk about consciousness because you don't know what it is. We'll never get there. We'll never get there. It's so terrible. We'll never actually know what art even is, unless one of the three of you have a definition.
Art is whatever
no.
makes you feel good.
Fair enough.
I mean, that feels like an entire... I feel like I want to avoid that question as much as possible, but at the same time, it seems so central to everything that we're going to talk about. This whole time, I've just been jotting down...
unavoidable hazard of aesthetics. I think it's why we used to never do it, because it would always devolve into the exact same conversation.
It would. And the conversation is itself endless. Because I can sort of lay out like a sheet over the room, like, and start listing things that are beautiful and just that are art. And then three of y'all would just start nodding. Like, yeah, that's art. Yeah, that's art. And it'll give us a notion of what game we're playing, But just like the word game, we don't actually really know what it is. We just know, we intuit when we see it. Oh, that's impactful. Like, for example, I was so I live near San Francisco. Listeners, if I haven't brought that up before, I don't think I have. I live near San Francisco, and I went to this museum called the Museum of... it doesn't matter, but I went to this museum, and there was this one particular painting called like the broken vase, or the breaking of the vase, and it's this little girl, and she has a broken vase by her foot. And it's a simple idea, and if you look it up, you'll find it. That might not be the name, but suffice it to say, this painting stalled me. I was walking by it, and I quite literally stopped, and I had to sit there and look at this painting for 20 minutes. I was completely just enthralled and gripped, and I was nothing but that which observed this painting, and that's all I was for 20 minutes of my life, and that's all I was for that moment.
The way I like to say that is, it arrested your thought.
It did.
Right.
That's a great way to say it. And I don't know why. It's just a lot of me was in that moment, Like, you look for moments that are akin to and sum up what is fundamentally you. And I mean everything that is you, whether it be like your hate, your love, your regrets, your hopes, your dreams, your everything. And whenever you find something that sort of encapsulates that huge supermajority of what it is that is fundamentally Brayden, or fundamentally Stephen, whether it be in the curvature of a face or a beautiful moment or just some, even like a scene in a movie. It really is all of reality, or a page in a book, and suddenly you're gripped by it, and that's all you are for that moment. It's a second. It's like your entire body goes, "Whoa, we need to rebuild what we are again," because something is happening right now.
I think I can steer us somewhere here. There is something that is central to all of my gripes with modern aesthetics, and that can be summed up in one word, and that word is minimalism. Am I right? Am I right, fellas? Minimalism. And this is what is associated with what Tanner was talking about, which I believe is in the ballpark of functionality, utility. Today we are so caught up in making our phones smaller, or then bigger again, or maybe a little bit smaller, just the right size, or we want to compress things to where they're really tiny and take up less space, or we want, this old logo had 15 different colors and whatever, but now it's one solid color and it's really nice and smooth, or on and on and on and on and on and on and on ad absurdum. My gripe is with minimalism. I don't know if you guys have heard that Hank Green or whatever it was audio line where it was like, I hate minimalism. I want to be surrounded by the treasures of my many adventures like I'm a wizard. If you guys all went to my apartment regularly, you know what it looked like. It was
maximalist.
It was absolutely maximalist. There wasn't an inch of space on the wall.
This man had some stuff.
Now, that's a personal preference of mine, but I don't think there's any mistaking that the United States culture is very much shifted towards minimalism. One of the go-to examples I point to is the way that fast food chains have rebranded their architecture and sort of their overall persona, but also other aspects of architecture, new skyscrapers and things like that, very minimalist. The super rich are building these crazy modern homes in the hills of Los Angeles and other places.
And filling it with nothing.
Yeah. Filling it with, if you've ever seen...
Lots of air.
Hey.
There's a great video by Cody Ko and Noel Miller where they interview the Kombucha King, GT Dave. If you guys have ever had kombucha, he's got one of the most popular brands. But they go to his house, and of course he's got a ton of money. The guy's selling kombucha, and his house is just this
kombucha.
Just a bunch of square boxes, and there's just emptiness everywhere, and like there might be a little pedestal here with a piece of art, or I don't know. Something about it just really irks me the wrong way. But yeah, I think the main gripe is minimalism. Thoughts?
I need to interject something here. It's a good moment. So in the survey that I did, for those of us listening, I did a survey. There were 52 responders, and we'll get into the data as needed. But I asked people to define their reason for saying if aesthetics is getting better or not better in one word, just one. And among the sample taken for not getting better, and in fact getting worse, we had such answers as oversaturation, sensationalism, and minimalism. Minimalism came up at least once, as Brayton has just revealed, but it was more like 3 or 4 times it was independently brought up. One thing that I'd like to suggest is that maybe minimalism is a response. And what I mean by that is, as our lives become more and more cluttered, think about all the technological stuff you do every day, dear listener. Watching videos, listening to this podcast, making your life more complicated in a digital landscape. Perhaps minimalism is a response to that. Perhaps we need empty spaces to look at.
I think that is to say, Brayden, specifically, if I were to speak to you on this, it seems to me that you're a maximalist. What is fundamentally you, what you're attenuated to. You're a bit like Dionysus to me. You're this person that expresses will in all sorts of ways. Just as a story, like you took me to like a weird goth night once, and like we just went to this huge raving party, and it was just every single type of human person that could possibly exist was in one place, just screaming and shaking their heads back and forth. And I could tell you were utterly and totally in your element at that moment. I had never seen you more in your element than just trashed, hanging out with just 70-year-old men dressed in black goth gowns, and y'all were just doing the Macarena. It was just the most insane thing I had ever seen. And you quite literally were in the nth degree, the most bright I had ever seen you. I think you're a maximalist, and I think you evaluate reality in those means. So, of course, minimalism is disgusting. If you were to find like an Apollo type, somebody with a sense of control, somebody who, like Stephen said, somebody who's in a maximal environment where they're just dealing with too much, whether that be in their upbringing or whether that be right now in their home, in their world, they look for the minimal focused moment where they can. And I think just like that, you have a completely different way of evaluating reality.
I am absolutely a maximalist. I think my argument to be made against minimalism is that I feel that it draws so much out of what can be said by any particular medium of art. One of the biggest elements of art is color. And typically when we look at minimal design, we are constrained to 3 colors, at least as I observe it, and that's white, black, and gray. I challenge you, all 3 of you, as well as anyone listening, next time you are out driving, you're in a parking lot, you're driving down the road, parking lots is much easier, just stop for a second and do a complete 360 and count for yourself how many cars that you see that have a paint color that is not white, gray, or black, and compare it to the overabundance of cars that are painted white, black, and gray. It's astonishing, and it may not be something that you notice right away, but once you start to keep an eye out, it's really funny. I've had many people ride around with me, and I love to do the experiment with them. We'll just pull into a parking lot, and I'll say, hey, I want you to do something for me. I'm going to stop the car. And then we look all the way around, and you may get 1 or 2 in a field of dozens of cars. And that's just one example. So color is sapped away from many things in a minimal design. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of popular corporations and companies have redesigned their logos to be monochromatic, which there's multiple reasons for that, but at the end of the day, it's minimalism. It's easy recognition.
One thing while we're on the subject, I want to challenge you a little bit. For those of us listening, of course, that's the whole point here, have some idea challenged, see if it holds water and so on. So anyway, I would directly point out that some movies deserve to be in monochrome, In other words, I get completely what you're saying, that out and about we might have an absence of what we might call hue, right? Because color is made of value and hue. And so, we're super concentrated on value, but not concentrated on hue. And so my point there is that some movies end up looking better. Think about certain moments in certain shows, even not just movies, but shows, or comic books, or whatever you feel like, that end up being monochrome. And it's a good thing that they're in monochrome. Value shows different information than hue, and it's nice to look at.
Right. The one thing that irks me about the color and the hue situation is that we experience the world as human beings, and we see color all the time, at least for those of us that are not, have a, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Color blindness?
Color blindness. I know there's a bunch of different types of color blindness. I didn't know if there was a particular word for all of them, or if that was just
an umbrella term.
But for the most part, we all see a wide variety of color. Because we experience the world in a wide variety of color, it makes sense that we would create with a wide variety of color. And on exception, like you said, we may decide to make things monochromatic or black and white, etc. But it feels to me now that we are flipping that on its head, and now we want everything to be white, black, or gray. We want it to be sleek, smooth,
or brown,
simplistic. Well, I wish there was more brown. I want to put up some brown wood panels on my wall, like back in the.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, you could do the same experiment by going to a street corner and doing the 360 thing that you talked about, and see if you can't pick out a color that's, not white, not black, not gray, and not brown. You won't find many outside of that.
I think we're somewhat touching upon like something kind of fundamental to this aesthetics issue, and that this is gonna be really annoying, but it really truly is in the eye of the beholder here, because I think this really speaks to we're talking about Brayton here. It speaks to what Brayton gets with, what Brayton sort of intuits and falls in love with. Because I've been there. I've been where Brayton's been. I've been at that moment where I'm just sickened by all these grays and whites and just single monochrome colors. But if you ever take the time, there are also moments in your life, and I'm sure Brayton's included in this, where you just study a single color and just sort of fall in love with this one way of being, just sort of get with this one particular moment and this one type, and just sort of fall for it. Everyone does this at some point in their life. It's something you give and take, and you sort of you deal with all of these things, and I think that sort of lets us realize that it is truly all perfectly and totally subjective, and it could be true to say that it's all falling into monochrome. It could be a true statement, and I think it is, especially at the very least for cars, certainly. But I do think whatever it is presently, whether or not that's a good or bad thing, it just goes right back to, well, just who you are, and who you are, not just generally like who Brayton is, but who Brayton is right now. What Brayton is right now at this point in his life. And the same thing for Stephen. The whole conversation that started here. Where are we right now? And what are we ready for? And what are we sick of? And I think that's where we intuit these questions of aesthetics, whether or not things need to change. Because I don't think we'll ever be as satisfied with the way that art presently is. If you are, then you're boring. The whole point of art is, no, that's a vague nothing statement. But I was going to say the whole point of art is to change and embrace new things. I don't know what art is, so I can't say that. But I can say a big part of art is just embracing things and changing.
Well, let me challenge your idea too, Trevor. I'm not playing devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
It's a genuine challenge I have for that idea. So, for those of us listening, what I'm about to say might not make sense, or it might not even resonate with you. But my friends and I, recently in the past 6 months or so, have completely watched an anime called Evangelion. All right? So, what is an anime? It's just a show. Think about it like a show. Well, I hated it. I genuinely hated it. And it's so sensational. In fact, every anime that's come out in at least the last 10 years has a moment in it that is completely robbed from Evangelion. And I hate it. I really, really don't like Evangelion. But I'm completely willing to admit, and in fact emphatic about, the fact that it's a masterpiece. Evangelion is a masterpiece. It's a masterclass show. I mean, it was flawless, but I still hated it. And it's not like one of those situations where it's like, oh, I love to hate this character. Like everybody thinks about Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Everybody loves to hate him. You know what I mean? No, that's not the situation. I genuinely dislike the theme of Evangelion. I genuinely dislike the message it's trying to put across. I genuinely dislike the author's sentiments about, I don't know, life, happiness, and mindset. I despise it all. But I'm perfectly willing and emphatic to say that it's a masterpiece. So what do you say about that, Trevor? I mean, I hate it, but I know it's good.
Mm-hmm. So now we're getting on something else. So that's to say that you have this opinion, but you also have that opinion at the same time, or you have this feeling, but also this sentiment at the same time. Which it sounds to me like you're trying to touch upon like the objectivity of an art piece, while sort of layering on top of it your subjectivity in relation to its objective magnificence or masterpiece-ness. Is that what you're saying?
Let me put out another example. Let me put out another example that might resonate with more viewers. Okay, Star Wars. The first 3 movies ever made were good movies and good stories. The prequels are hilariously bad movies, but they're good little stories. That's why we love them. And then, of course, the new Disney movies, the sequel trilogy, are both bad movies and bad stories.
Yes.
So, what is to be said about that? Is that to say that there's something objective about these attributes you've just given them, or is that to say that that's how Stephen feels about them?
Well, see, I think that's kind of what we're here to talk about as well. I mean, so I actually do think that there is an objective sense about aesthetics. I truly do. In other words, perhaps if we met aliens, they would have a different set of aesthetics, and we would be forced to kind of appreciate that. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, without falling into, oh, well, everybody likes it, so it must be good. We know that's false. That's a logical fallacy. In any argument, if you say, oh, well, X amount of people think that this is true, well, that actually doesn't matter. What matters is, what is true or what is in the data or whatever you're talking about. It's actually very hard to gather data about aesthetics. All you can do is ask people about it. And so I'm perfectly willing to admit here that I don't have a good argument for objective standards, but it's one that I'm working on, if that makes sense. So what do I mean by the Star Wars movies were good movies and good stories? The original 3 had the elements of the monomyth, lots of stuff that we all appreciate, like literally every human being appreciates. Once again, that actually doesn't matter. But in as much as we can say, okay, well, lots of people like it, so, it must have something good about it, just take it with a grain of salt. That's all I want you to do. And then we can say, well, they're good movies, not just good stories. They're good movies because they were well put together, like the lighting, the digital effects, as small as they were. The lightsaber sound. I mean, for me, sound is so important. John Williams did Star Wars. I mean, you can't get better than that. And of course, he robbed most of the music for Star Wars. I don't know if you three know that, but he sure did. And it's all there, but he put his own thing on it, and it became frickin' Star Wars. It became before Pokemon dethroned it, it was seriously the biggest intellectual property ever devised by humans. It was that big. So it had to have something. The prequel movies, they are bad movies. They're not well put together. You look at the actors and the setting, and it's like, what is going on? But they're good little stories. That's why most people end up liking them. And then the sequel trilogy, they're just bad stories that make no sense, riddled with defects, riddled with problems, riddled with extra problems like, changing hands for the art direction and so on. And they're bad movies. They're not well put together. They're over CGI'd. All the complaints that you usually hear about people with movies, like we could tell that none of this mattered and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that for every art form, the artists in that form probably know what it takes to put together, say, a good movie or a good piece of music.
A good story overall, a good something that when it touches you, it sticks. It's there. So I'd like to touch on one thing, to sort of be a contrarian to that opinion. Consider something that you consider, you personally, Stephen, you consider contrary to the way that you presently exist, or at the very least, from what I understand about Stephen, what Stephen is. Think about something that lasted more than just the 40 years that Star Wars has been popular and famous. Think of something that lasted for 2,000 years. It still lasts. And that's one particular religion that all of us have a very close relationship with in one way or another, and that's Christianity. What it means to be a Christian was incredibly important in this way. 2,000 years of Christianity. Not only is Christianity as a story big, but if you look at what Gospels even are, it's stories of stories of stories that build upon the previous stories. That's why John is so... If anyone knows, John is the last written gospel of the 4 canonical gospels in the Bible, and it is so much bigger, more expansive of what Jesus can do in it compared to the early ones, like in Mark. The story gets bigger and more massive. People fall in love with these stories. They change it to better fit what they love, and in that way, it kind of evolves, more attenuated to what it means to be a human being. and the story changes and changes, and bad stories.
I've often said that
Uh-huh.
the reason why the Gospels and the Bible as a whole is actually special is because it was written by humans and not by
It was,
God.
and it
You know what I mean?
evolved. Exactly,
Exactly.
exactly,
It's
and
an
it
evolving
evolved
work
and
that
changed.
at least
Yes.
tried to have the message that, hey, we should probably be good to one another, and hilariously
Yeah.
failed. You know?
Well, it fails every single day, but it also succeeds in its own little ways. It's weird. It's strange. I agree with you that it fails. I absolutely unequivocally agree with you. But it also keeps pulling people in and keeps
It's
as a
attractive.
reciprocal relationship keeps people in. It's attractive.
Maybe that's what
But
aesthetics are. Maybe it's a force of attraction,
sure.
you know, between
But that's
someone and what's being looked at.
so that's the contrary point that underlies this whole claim. That's why I bring this up, because you strike me as someone who is extremely not attenuated to this evolved Christian mythos. You're a very not
Hmm.
Christian person.
Yeah.
So just like that, that's the loosening, that's the debuckling of this objective aesthetic standpoint that aesthetics can be objective. Because just like that, we found someone who stands outside of the aesthetic architecture that was been around for 2,000 years and was extremely important for 2,000 years and still is to a lot of people. Now, you are yourself someone who stands out of it. You're let's
Hmm.
say that is to say you're someone who hates Star Wars. So how
True,
do you feel
true.
about
But
that?
let's just go back to the original point. I have a deep and abiding hatred for most things that come out of the Bible, and I'd regularly listen to what are they called? Like not Renaissance music that came out of Christianity. I don't think that's the right word to put there. Anyway, my point is that I regularly pay a visit to Christian art. I regularly pay a visit to Christian, just completely theistic music pieces that have a haunting brilliance, that have a most human demeanor. In other words, like the religion is so secondary to the beauty, and even though I have a deep and abiding hatred for most things out of the Bible, it did create this wonderful art, and I love it. If someone were to look at, very classic, the Sistine Chapel, and say, "Oh, I hate it," I would say you're wrong. You're just wrong. You're philosophically confused.
I want to try to steer us in one direction I think may open up a little bit of discussion. And that is, I've got a whole bunch of stuff written down on my piece of paper, and one is complexity versus functionality. We talked earlier about art. I think, Trevor, what did you say? Art is change fundamentally? It's appreciation of change, or just maybe some sort of circular, self-serving things change, art changes the change, something like that.
Well, now that I think about it more, it's more like life fundamentally is change. Whenever you see an art or a piece of art, the first one of the things you want to do is, well, yes, underscore, but, and then it goes on, changes.
Right.
Maybe we should maybe we should reword that, Trevor. Maybe something more to your liking that I know you'll love. Life is an interaction, and interactions necessarily change.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that.
That sounds very Trevor. But another old as time saying about art is that art imitates life, or does life imitate art? And I think those both serve each other's purpose. And
They're both true.
Yeah. But in today's time,
I mean-
Yeah, go ahead, Tanner.
Logically, life begets art. No? I mean, I would personally give art a more broad definition, I guess, in my own sense, as being the expression of any emotion or thought. And while life can imitate art, of course, it is art that is created in the image of life, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Sure.
like, Tanner, I hate to stoop this low, but have you ever purchased anything that was artful? Like, have you yourself ever purchased a movie?
Yeah.
So, I mean, wouldn't you say that it mattered enough to you to purchase? I mean, in other words, maybe life is imitating art. And of course that's the lowest you could go. But sort of a higher realm than that? What if that movie or show you purchased or bothered to subscribe to or whatever, what if that influenced your way of thinking? And therefore, life imitates art. I truly believe both are just true statements.
Mm-hmm.
Because stories are just so meaningful to us as humans. I mean, like, we've had music before we had language. But I would be willing to bet every penny I have that we had narrative before we had anything, because of the way that the brain's put together. Trevor, I mean, you could talk about that later, but Brayden, we should go back to what you were saying.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to piece all this together. I've got art is change in complexity versus functionality. I think that may be the next step as far as my argument goes. Is now in the 21st century. We've hit a crossroads between a love for complexity and brute functionality. Everything today seems so keen to just get the job done in the easiest and most economic way possible, maybe even the most affordable way possible. You know, you can go to the dollar store and get things that are like almost entirely just made for its purpose, no extra bits and bobs, bells and whistles. So it feels like there's the absolute utility of an item versus its complexity, like the ability or the potential for complexity. And when I say complexity, I'm talking about a bunch of different things. I'm talking about detail. I'm talking about, for lack of a better phrase, vibe or life, the ability to provoke thought. Another one that may slip under the rug here is recognition. So what I mean by that is, say you've got a skyscraper on one hand and a Gothic cathedral on the other. Something intuitively tells me that one of those is uniquely more recognizable than the other. We can see a dozen skyscrapers that all look vaguely familiar or vaguely similar in...
Think nothing of it.
Yeah, think nothing of it. Dozens of cities across the world with just glass skyscrapers. But Gothic cathedrals are something very particular. They provoke thought. They have a story behind them that is very unique in their own way. And a lot of
the expression of mankind's connection with God.
Right, and then what is a skyscraper? Is that our connection with corporatism or capitalism or the need for office space? You know, but that doesn't provoke
our connection with our need for more space.
Right. I think there's ultimately a balancing act between complexity and functionality in relation to value, because that's what we're talking about in this conversation about aesthetics, is things that we value. And something having utility is very valuable to us. That is, we end up there in almost every philosophical conversation at one point or another, is the utility of something, whether it's religion or some particular
it's inescapable. It's inescapable. I mean,
right.
My goodness.
But then again, like was just said earlier, I think maybe it was Stephen, we also have an inherent longing for meaning. If my entire life was filled with things that only met the minimal goal, which was to provide utility and nothing more, what would I be left with? Where would I find my meaning if my world lacked complexity, detail, life, the provocation of thought, things like that? If I lived inside of
narratives, what narratives or what schemes would you have if you had a completely Spartan environment where, I mean, like, you just did the bare minimum for every function, like you're saying, and you'd be miserable. Every human being would be miserable.
I'd say one thing about this. I don't think the objects themselves are what we're talking about here. I don't think it's the buildings. I don't think it's these modern architectures versus cathedrals. I think it speaks more towards, Brayton. This speaks towards the perceiver, the evaluator, the one who creates these ways of interacting with what's around them. Because you can find endless beauty in every moment. You can find endless beauty in even what you and I, at this moment at least, via a game of contrasts, find ugly about a brutalist architecture piece versus like the Notre Dame. You know, like you think you sort of find a magnitudinal scale and sort of place the Notre Dame on top of the scale, and you put something like this brutalist architecture on the very bottom. But truly, if you want to, if you just sit there and get really, really, really quiet, and you just sort of lose yourself in this moment, it's endlessly beautiful. This brutalist piece of architecture, even as strange as that sounds, endlessly beautiful. And when you want to talk about creating these increases of complexity versus functionality, well, it speaks more towards your current want to have functionality and then the occasional change to want complexity. And the objects themselves don't matter. They don't. It's just how you feel about it right now as you interact with it. For example, like you could have something simple like this barren blank cube, and you want to increase complexity, and then you sort of add color to each side, you know, something like that. Just something as simple as adding color to each side of this cube. Well, you could also be at a different position where you have a colored cube, and now you want to sort of add edges to it, where you like scrape little shapes into it. The object was fundamentally the same at the end point of one perspective, at the beginning of another. It just depends on the way that you currently want to interact with reality. It's just I would argue that all of this is endlessly both horrifying and beautiful. It's everything all at once. It just depends on the way that you currently feel about it. What do you need right now, Brayden? What is it that you need? What are you not satisfied with? And just like that, you have what you want. It just depends on who you are right now compared to who you were, and what you need as a person, as a human being. What are you not satisfied with right now?
I'm unsatisfied.
I would
go ahead, Steve.
I would like to just interject something very quickly there. Trevor, just to make sure for our audience and for our benefit, can you agree with me that there are obviously more complex things than others? In other words, I'm in my apartment right now, and my cat is close to my computer. And as a scientist, I know for a fact that the cat is impossibly more complex than the computer, even though it doesn't seem that way. Even though one can render video graphics and all that, one of them has a genome.
Sure. I mean, I see your point. I absolutely see how it is you currently feel about this and the relationship between those two objects. And I want to say yes, but also that's going to need...
agree with me? I'm saying, can you agree with me that objectively, I mean, Tanner and I can talk more about the physics if we need to, but I don't want to right now, because nobody wants to. But fundamentally, in our universe, there are more complicated things than others. It has to do with information.
So when we ask the question, which is more complex, this cat or this computer? At that time, at that moment, the answer is the cat. Absolutely.
But it will forever be the cat. It will forever be the cat. There's no other.
That is to say,
no
this exact computer in this instance versus this exact cat in this instance, regardless of circumstance, person, place, time, or thing. If you compare these two instances...
No, I'm saying that we could put the Google servers against it, and the cat still wins. To quote, Richard Dawkins, just to make sure he gets in here somewhere, it's the greatest show on earth, Relating back to what you were saying, like if we just stop and appreciate what's around us, things are endlessly beautiful. And the cat and I are the only organisms in this, apartment that I can see. We're easily the most complicated things on this earth.
Well, when I think of the greatest show on earth, when I think of that term, it is life, but it's also everything else. It's all of these things. So to say, like, compare it to everything ad infinitum forever, the answer is I don't know. I don't think so. I do think at this instance, comparing the computer on my laptop I'm currently talking to you from to just a cat, absolutely. In that instance, absolutely. But I don't know what the future holds. I don't know when we're talking about the storage of information and that sort of thing, if we want to have that be a definition for complexity, and it's a good definition, and we could begin interacting with this concept of that particular way of viewing complexity, I think we can begin having these ways of answering questions based upon that, like which is more complex, this or that, based upon this definition. We'll start generating answers, good answers, just like what is the best chess move at this instance. You have objective answers to those questions. But
yeah, within a limited, rule set and stuff. But to kind of tie it back to what Brayton was saying, and what I really appreciate about Brayton's argument right now, is the fact that he's relating complexity and, of course, it feeds into value, you know what I mean? But it's complexity and function, right, Brayden?
Yes.
And so they're inextricably linked. You know what I mean? I mean, so, art is very complex, at first glance and so on. And there's some value in it, at least to us, if we want to invite, Trevor's ideas here for sure. But yeah, all I was trying to say is that surely we can all agree that objectively there has to be, a measure of complexity, and we can actually kind of get it. I get what Trevor's saying for sure about, in this moment and so on. But anyway,
let me throw out some other stuff. Maybe we can talk about some other examples. So this is my McDonald's rant. I'm not a huge fast food guy, first of all. Like I've tried to separate myself.
I hope none of us are.
Yeah, I try to separate myself from fast food as much as possible for corporate reasons, for health reasons, for a multitude of different reasons. I read a book called
for child labor reasons.
Right. There's a great book called Chew on This. I can't remember the author's name, but fantastic book. It isn't as critical of fast food as I think it could be, but it does give you a very good look at the history and how basically everything copied McDonald's and yada, 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 and why it's terrible for you and people have really easy access to it. Anyways, there's a McDonald's that is right up the road from my house that I had been going to ever since I was a kid. This was back in the day before McDonald's, along with many other fast food companies, modernized their architecture. Almost every fast food place you can find, with the exception of a few, have updated their architecture, interior, and kind of overall branding to reflect a very minimal, modern style. Back in the day, this was none other than a rock and roll McDonald's. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it was it was rocking.
Willis.
Yes, if we can get some fair use.
It was bumping in there.
Yeah,
my goodness.
Can we get some fair use for the rock and roll McDonald's here? Insert now. Inside,
real quick, Brayden, can you imagine that my high schoolers right now have no idea what you're talking about? Like me and you, went to McDonald's expecting all of that, and right. Now they will never have the ability to look at it,
Right, and the reason for that too, as an aside, and you can find this in Chew on This, is that a big part of marketing for fast food is that they found out that the way to get the money is to cater to the children, because the children are going to nag their parents over and over and over to go to McDonald's, and so the parents are going to go to McDonald's and get the kids food, and then the parents are hungry, so they're going to get something too, and the kids are going to get hooked, and they're just going to keep coming back more and more and more and more. McDonald Land, play places, all that business, all wrapped up, collect all the toys, collect all the Beanie Babies. They were great. I had some and I lost them. Anyways, all that to say, this was a rock and roll McDonald's. They had Elvis memorabilia on the inside. There was black and white tiles. There were neon lights that were up on the walls. They had different little pictures. They had an old gas pump right when you walked in. It had character. It had its own unique style compared to probably many of the other McDonald's all across the nation. It told a story when you walked in. You wondered about the old gas pump. You wondered about Elvis. You sat there and you saw Marilyn Monroe wardrobe items up in a frame on the wall. It just had character. Even before the McDonald Land stuff, there was a whole narrative about McDonald Land and these characters, which I think is not now. I think they've really done away with that for the most part.
And they've ripped on McDonald's.
Yeah, rip. I don't know what happened. But, anyways, fast forward many, many years, and I'm doing DoorDash, and I need to pick up some food at this McDonald's that I have not been to the inside of since they renovated. They may have renovated twice, actually, because I remember the exterior changing and nothing on the interior, and then perhaps later they renovated the interior because it has those kiosks now where you order yourself, which I hadn't seen actually anywhere around here at all at any time. Anyways,
I don't know if y'all remember, but I've actually done quite a bit of construction work, and I can tell you that it was almost certainly two, because the McDonald's around here has the same thing. Like, it's a 2-stage renovation. They do one part and invite these people to do it, and then they do another part and invite those people to do it, and so on.
Right. And so this is what brings me to the messages that I sent that prompted this episode of Four Mortal Coils. I went inside this McDonald's to pick up a DoorDash order, and I look around at what has become of a once great rock and roll McDonald's.
Yeah, just bumping McDonald's.
I was horrified. I was really horrified, and I'm rushing through our Discord now to try to find these pictures that I sent, but I'm just going to describe them from memory. The walls
Brey is rolling in his grave. They've
walls.
shot the clown.
I mean, allow us, Brayton. You know, we've already said it. If you did a 360 in this McDonald's, you wouldn't even find the yellow. You know,
right? The walls were stark concrete gray, looked unfinished, looked like somebody poured a slab of concrete as the wall and left it there.
And left it there.
There were metal.
Whatever happened to the effigy of Ronald McDonald sitting on the bench out front?
Right. You can't even get a picture with Ronald anymore.
Idolism.
Right. And this was the worst part. This was the only time that I ever really sat back and went, holy cow, this is so bad. I walked around the entire restaurant just looking, and the worst part was when I got to the play place. The one part that's supposed to have a shred of life for the kids, for the children.
Kids.
Dimly lit. They copied and pasted the same bleak gray hellscape into the play place. Even part of the actual like construction of the play area the color was gone. I don't know if you guys ever played that old game.
Our McDungeon.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you guys ever played that old game Toontown, but the whole point of the game was that you were these bright, happy, colorful toons, and there was Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these other characters.
Yes,
and the corporate capital, I mean, there were multiple different versions, but basically these robotic people were coming to take over Toontown and turn everything gray and into a company to make money and profit or sue people.
And that's
or
what happened.
I don't know. That's exactly what happened to the McDonald's. The cogs took over the McDonald's, and now it's a 4-story HQ, and you got to get you and 3 other buddies to go and throw pies at the CEOs until they make it happy and fun again. I don't know. I don't really want fast food places to cater to children again because I think it's terrible for them, but the point is that the aesthetics have gone to the shitter.
They should still be catering to somebody. They are catering to nobody except the bottom dollar.
It's purely functional now. You go. You're not there to stay anymore because who wants to sit in there and stay? Who wants to go inside?
Y'all know what we're talking about here, of course, because we are all educated people and know for a fact that McDonald's is not here to stay forever. You know what I mean? And of course, I'm being kind of sarcastic, our dear listener. If you are not educated, what I'm saying is that you as well know McDonald's is not here to stay forever. They're kind of just riding on their own name, And it reminds me of like the mandate of heaven. You know what I'm talking about? Where like the deep like Asian political theory about like a new dynasty comes in with the mandate of heaven and then loses it and then becomes a tyrant and so on and so forth. Like it's all that crap.
I would say to that, talking about the mandate of heaven. Well, everything goes away, whether it be Elvis or Coca-Cola or McDonald's. Or anything, everything goes away. I think that's just a natural fact of the universe. That is to say, I'm agreeing with Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, and that's all the mandate of heaven, like ideas even doing,
Yeah, well, I wanted to offer a bit of a contrary, just a slight one to this McDonald's thing, and that's to say that sometimes simplicity can be beautiful, and bring up the mandate of heaven. This kind of connects. If you haven't. If you don't know anything about Zen Buddhism, there was an interesting period in China where and it wasn't only in China, but in China there was this period during the Tang Dynasty, and I could be wrong about that, but the internet told me it was the Tang, so I feel inspired, where essentially there was a period where people would completely lose and let go of all the complexity of life and just get completely and silently lost in a present moment, with quiet little things like a tiny little teapot and just little teacups, and just sort of quietly share in a completely and utterly I guess you could say, minimalist moment, and just sip on the most subtle tea, and just share in this moment. And it
Yeah,
was at that
Trevor,
moment, in
I
that
think
instant,
I think
beautiful.
I think that we can all agree that Ronald McDonald is not in his teacup. I mean, like, he's not appreciating anything, and of course by Ronald McDonald we're talking about the corporate overlords of McDonald's. I mean, like, they don't care. Like, they're not trying to appreciate anything. And I think that's Brayton's gripe as well as his present gripe, is that we're not doing minimalism because we're trying to appreciate a moment. We're doing it because, like, it's just kind of, whatever.
Why should they care? I mean, we're gonna buy
I
the
don't
hamburgers
think they cared in the
anyway.
first place. Sure.
Yeah,
Well, I think
and
Brayton
Trevor,
already
you're
talked about
not
this.
Trevor, Tanner, you're absolutely right. That's what I'm trying to say. Is like, they know their name is big enough, and they're just like, well, they're gonna buy them anyway, so why even bother? And that's what I'm saying. They're not in their teacups. They're in there. Why don't we even give a shit?
It's pure functionality from the get-go. They're throwing all the aesthetics out the window because people are hooked now. They don't care. They just want their food, and they want to get out, and they want to get fat and have high cholesterol.
Yep. And COVID did nothing to help that whatsoever. That get out and go mentality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Here's a follow-up. Here's a follow-up on that same exact note. And this is a tragedy. This is a real tragedy. I'm going to bring us to our near and dear New Orleans, Louisiana. There is a crisis in New Orleans right now. Beautiful, historic city. One of the most important developments of the United States, I would argue, is the Port of New Orleans.
Oh, for sure. And, it's all about to be swallowed up by
that too.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
That's probably that's another tragedy that's actually probably more important than this one that I'm about to bring up.
That's why I brought it up, Brayton, to jab at you.
But the aesthetic tragedy.
I damn near had to resist the urge to say which one.
Mm-hmm. Is it the AIDS pandemic that's still going on down there? Is it the rising water level? Is it the aesthetics, Brayton?
Come on, it's the only thing we have here. Don't beat the dead horse, guys. But listen, the aesthetic tragedy of New Orleans is that post Katrina. Now that things are kind of getting back on track. You know what I mean.
It's been 20 years.
These housing and real estate developers have been buying up all these old historic properties and flipping them.
Probably mowing them down.
Well, either that or, there's that too. Some of them are being mowed down and being built from the foundation back up as a completely new hip modernist home in the middle of a neighborhood that is surrounded by historic homes that are uniquely New Orleans, and they stick out like
those are people who never plan to sell because they're stupid.
Right, and there are also those, many of them, who scoop these houses up by the boatloads and flip the insides, making them look completely different than they did historically. On a quick
tangent real quick. I have a personal hatred for people who just go out of their way specifically to destroy something that came long before them, has a far richer history than they will ever hope to grasp, purely for the sake of building something that they want in complete and total ignorance of any historical or artistic significance that could possibly hold. Yeah, I think these people should be lifted up by their ankles like a newborn baby and beat with sticks.
Oh yeah.
Continue.
Thank you. And it's not about, because listen, if you cared about the art, if you cared about the culture, if you cared about the history of the home that you were flipping, you would do your very, very, very best to preserve it, or at least try to maintain the image. But they don't care about that. It's just like the McDonald's.
Or I'll do you one better, Brayton. To go along with what Tanner is saying there, for someone to come along, destroy something, and refuse to replace it with something that even approaches. You know what I mean?
What gives you the right?
Yeah.
Except for your own hubris.
It's about.
I gotta disagree with all three of y'all here. I gotta say I feel very differently about this.
Well, no, Trevor, just before you go, what I'm specifically talking about are the very real people who exist on our planet that want to, tear down an establishment because it's an establishment. In other words, they don't have an argument. They just have a claim. They have a claim that this establishment, such as aesthetics, is bad, and they have no argument to back it up. Like, in other words, I'm perfectly willing to say that, if they come in and replace it with minimalist stuff, there is a good argument to say, okay, well, that's what they wanted, so whatever. But no, I'm talking about, and I think Tanner's talking about as well, people who come in, wreck something, and do not care. Like, they cannot be bothered.
And they have an unsated desire for money.
Yes, exactly.
Sure,
like,
sure. Their ideas aren't in the right place.
Regardless of what happens.
I see your point. But I would raise this. And this connects to what I said earlier. All of this, all of these things that you say, that if people don't keep these cultures exactly the way that they were, all of these things, the things that we want to keep alive, these things that you want to keep in New Orleans, keep the rich culture that exists there. And it does. There is a beautiful culture in New Orleans that goes very far back. But it's worth noting, and this is really important, it will be gone. It will go away. There's no changing that. It will die. It'll go away. Just like Coca-Cola, just like Jesus Christ, just like Stephen, Brayton, Trevor, and Tanner. All of these things will be gone. Like, think of it like this. There is in modern day Cambodia, there was an ancient civilization that created what we know as like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom. These large, expansive stone temples and cities that are beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And then one day in the 1500s, they ceased to exist. This pertains, I swear. They ceased to exist. And we spent some time, archaeology spent time trying to understand, well, why did this civilization stop? We're trying to look into all these different reasons as to why the people that had created these things, Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, why is it that people stopped? What happened to this civilization? And then eventually, one of the reasons that it came down to was belief and ideas. The people there came to the realization that no matter what, all of this will turn into nothing. It's sort of a Buddhist idea, where no matter what, all of this will turn into dust. So why build these stone buildings? And just like that, the civilization did, at least from our perspective today, looking back at it, end. Because from that point forward, it was all wood. And here's the reason why I bring that up. The same is true for us, and including the stone buildings themselves. It'll turn to nothingness. That match is true. And I agree that there are certain times in our lives where it's good to keep things and keep this beautiful art and culture together so that we may see it and experience it. I'm all for experience, including experiencing these New Orleans moments. But to say that it needs to stay that way ad infinitum until the end of the universe, until the heat death of the universe, or whatever it is happens, that is, that sentiment, you're really writing that feeling, that sentiment of wanting to keep these beautiful things beautiful, these things that you treasured, the things that you were raised with, where your family pointed and said, that's beautiful. But change will happen, exactly, and it's good to accept such change. Mm-hmm.
So this is exactly what I'm talking about, though. Like, and I don't think that Brayton or even our dear listener is so stupid as to believe that like any one of our ideas will stand against time. Like, that's just a foolish concept. I mean, if you know anything, you know that it's all impermanent, and that's a good thing. Like, we should really endeavor to follow that up with that statement, that's a good thing, because people will hear that and run with it. I mean, it's happened to me plenty of times that, someone will say, well, nothing matters, and this, that, and the other. And that's like such a childish argument. My point is that I think that, like what Brayton was saying, there's something intuitive. There's something intuitively graspable about surrounding ourselves with these things that have meaning. And that's why I think that I'm objective when it comes to aesthetics. And I'm not saying that like the color red is better than the color blue. Like, that's just nonsense. Of course I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you can even have one thing that's objective about, people and aesthetics, then I think that does categorically kind of make you, part of the objective camp when it comes to art and architecture and so on. Anyway, my point is that I think you just made my argument for me. It's all impermanent, and the only thing that is consistent is that we continue to surround ourselves with things that have meaning. And that's the important part. And I think what Brayton is saying is that all this stuff, all this clutter in this McDonald's, it was had meaning, and then they just took it away, and there is no meaning there anymore.
Yes.
In other words,
I completely disagree. I have to say, I completely disagree.
But
Completely.
Trevor, surely you can agree with me. Like that. It's not like they replaced it for a reason. It goes back to that claim and argument thing that I said earlier. In other words, it cost them money to remove all that stuff. Why'd they do it?
Well, I would say this. When you say your first claim, your first statement, I completely agree with that. We surround ourselves with meaning. As soon as you start to exist in this place, in this where you presently are, and begin interacting with reality, you exist and surround yourself with meaning. But don't think for a second that it's not all meaningful. For example, when it comes to New Orleans and like these old buildings, Brayton's absolutely correct in saying that they are endlessly meaningful. The aesthetic of it is true; it's beautiful endlessly. But so is the coming of the next age. Just like conservatives today, like if we're talking about political conservatism, so to be conservative is to want to keep the beautiful things that you have fallen in love with all around you, of your society, of your country. You want to keep them the same. That you can find beautiful things in that which is around us, but just like Brayton himself being a very political left liberal person, there's also beautiful things in bringing change. Brayton himself, within him exists the alternative of the position that currently exists, that is being espoused. All of these things are meaningful.
Well,
to say
Trevor,
that you look for meaning is true, but the objects that underlie them change all the time. And if you want to talk about McDonald's, like they don't care and they made this change. That is true. And so it is also true, and I think Brayton touched upon this earlier, about bringing in the child stuff in the first place. If we're going to talk about the overall weird nature of McDonald's, then it's all just capitalist and all that kind of stuff. If you want to take that lens, if you like, it all comes to be true for all of it unilaterally, both when it comes to all the colorful neon as well as the weird minimalist stuff that they have today. But at the end of the day, all of it is just meaningful insofar as you look for meaning and want meaning in the things that are around you. But just like I said earlier, with the cube starting off as blank or with color, you create these meanings yourself. It is meaningful insofar as you find it meaningful.
Look, here's the deal. I want Brayton to weigh back in on this for sure, but we need to step away from the idea of like just the McDonald's. All right, because and you did this well, Trevor, earlier whenever you brought up the Cambodian civilization. Like we need to consider more of that, but like. Here's a problem that we have in America, and I hope that Brayton agrees with me. Think about all the movies that are just trash. Think about all of the brutalist architecture that is just trash. In other words, our dear listener, if you want these statements to just be my subjective opinion, you go right ahead. They're just trash. So why is it? Short-term gains. It's like a disease of the head. Like all of these companies that we're surrounded by are obsessed with these short-term gains,
reboots.
And they are throwing long-term dividends like to the wind. They just don't care, and we're going to see a great upheaval. We're already seeing it. I mean, I can go to the local mall here. It's actually a really good mall. I go on vacation, and there's not malls like as good as ours here, and I mean. It's all closing. All that stuff is closing because it was so short-sighted of them to open up these stores, even in the 80s and 90s whenever all this was booming and all that crap. No, it was still short-sighted, and they bit the dust for it. Sears has been around for longer than our great-grandparents have been around, and all it took was like 1 decade of short-sighted crap to make them go away completely. And so
we had an original edition of the Sears and Roebuck catalog on my counter, huh?
Well, there you go. So what I'm trying to say is that
that's some Tanner shit right there.
Specifically about our culture, and I'm sure Brayton can agree with me, it's the short-term gains that genuinely disgust us. Like they are not investing in the future whatsoever. And that's the problem with minimalism. They're not investing anything in the future. And as much as we want to say, oh, well, maybe they're just opening the way for a new, paradigm. No, they're not. It's literally McDonald's we're talking about. They don't care. You're
right.
They're not opening
right.
anything. They're not opening anything.
There's no appeal to the human element.
Now we're talking about authenticity, whether things are authentically minimalist or inauthentically minimalist. Now, that feels like now we're entering into a different layer of the conversation now. Because now we're talking about authenticity. Because I bring up earlier, like, oh, look at this minimalist example in this, during the Tang Dynasty China. But that has nothing to do with the inauthentic nature of this minimalist art that you see in McDonald's, for example, or these buildings and all that. There's this inauthentic something or rather happening about it that the four of us, at the very least, find disgusting. I feel like there's a texture to it, a hue or a color that the four of us are overall sickened by and are done with. I feel like we're touching something else.
Let's consider Star Wars just at least one more time. The sequel trilogy, they are just universally hated by literally everyone I know. They're just so bad because it was a complete sellout cash grab operation, and everybody recognizes it for that. That's I think what is at the core of our specific issue. Brayden?
I think there's something to be said about the authenticity of design changes or motivations in there, but I want to ask a question. I could talk about that Star Wars thing for so long. Oh my gosh. I've made content on that actually already, but for each of you, would you agree that some things, not necessarily everything, but at least some things can be more meaningful than others?
100%.
To me, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of this, because if we took a hypothetical situation where we had, like was mentioned earlier, the Sistine Chapel, and somebody said the Sistine Chapel, and I'm going to beat this horse until the end of
this hypothetical person needs to be shot.
This Sistine Chapel was going to be replaced by a McDonald's. We would all be outraged, would we not?
Yes.
Well, Sure. Well, here's something I'll say to that. You know who hated the Sistine Chapel? You know, he thought it was disgusting and just hated everything about it, thought it was kitsch and stupid? You know who thought that? Christopher Hitchens. He went there. He thought the entire thing was, I suppose you could use the word again, inauthentic. The entire thing was kitsch. He hated it. Everything about it. There's an entire thing you can find on the internet if you look him up.
But would he have preferred it be replaced by a McDonald's?
I don't know what he would have preferred. I don't, but I see what you're getting at, and I think we've really gotten into the idea of authenticity and we seem to really hate these inauthentic cash grab things, and now we're characterizing reality in those terms.
You're absolutely right. Think about this. I wish there was an umbrella term for this, and maybe there is. You guys are all familiar with stores. TJ Maxx is kind of a little bit on the higher end, but it's sort of in the same ballpark. Have you guys heard of these stores like Five Below or other sort of maybe a little higher end dollar stores?
I actually helped build one.
Things like that. So, for example, take those, and then take, on the other hand, a lot of these apps, like I think an older one was Wish, but now there's Shein, there's I think it's Temu. There's all these apps where you can go on there and spend $10 and get a whole bunch of really cheap shit that is honestly put a poor imitation of a much better, higher quality product. It is that practice that I think is part of the discussion, in the sense that the authenticity of things is lacking, as well as the complexity, perhaps. Take I'm trying to figure out how to plug this in. Like, I can go to TJ Maxx and get a print on a frame of some popular piece of art, or I can go to Hobby Lobby or get some. There's all these. Nothing would compare to having the real Mona Lisa in your living room as opposed to one of the millions and millions of prints that have been made of it, because the real Mona Lisa is almost infinitely more meaningful and valuable than any reproduction that came off of a printing press. Just like the Sistine Chapel is practically infinitely more meaningful than a newly built McDonald's on its foundation.
I I never thought we'd actually do it, huh? But we've managed to somehow wrap around to the platonic ideal.
These are all just cheap imitations of some higher form of beauty that we will just never be able to comprehend. And now I sound like
actually chased aesthetics straight up the tree back to the beginning.
Hey, he might have been right about something.
Like, I mean, I would like to say this. Do not misunderstand me one small little bit. The Sistine Chapel and all the surrounding structures are comparable to Las Vegas, okay? And I'm using Hitchens here for a reason. I love him to death, but like, as far as him hating the Sistine Chapel and what it looked like, he's just wrong. I mean, just that. In other words, what I said earlier doesn't change just because it's Hitchens. But anyway, it reminds me of Las Vegas. It would be like saying that Las Vegas was built by all the people who won.
Well, I would say to this, to that, I would say this. I think the nature of these things kind of paint the way that we feel about them. And it's in this way. Christopher Hitchens, the reason why he hated it, he described the reason why. He hated the fact that they were built upon the sale of indulgences and what they represented. Yes, exactly.
That's what I'm trying to say with the Vegas example.
Well, that's the exact thing that I think runs counter to the entire claim that you're making for this reason. I think that he colored with that hue of indulgences his sickening favor, his sickening dislike for the Sistine Chapel. That's why he disliked it. That's the exact reason why he disliked it. And I think we now, due to the fact that he could exist in a space and have that dislike where it exists objectively wrong for him, the fact that that's true for one person, I think completely invalidates the objective nature of these things. To create even a single outlier completely invalidates the idea of objectivity in these means.
I would just simply say this, before we move on to anything else. I would just simply say this. It's the same reason why I'm completely able to say that the holy, supposed allegedly holy texts such as the Quran, such as the Bible, blah, blah, blah. All these things are put together by humans that cared enough to do it. Now, don't get me wrong. A lot of malice found its way into these things. The Sistine Chapel's no different. A lot of humans cared enough to do this. And there's something special about that. In other words, one day, the entirety of the Vatican will be completely opened, completely made over, completely bulldozed down. I mean, whatever you want to call it, it's all going away. But a lot of people cared enough to put that shit together, and that's the authenticity. That's why I'm just completely willing to say, as far as the artwork is concerned in there, that even someone as aggrandized as I make him, Hitchens, is just wrong. A lot of people cared to do that. Now, look, it was that the support to make all that stuff 100% was made by lying to a lot of people, but nevertheless, a lot of people cared to do it, and so
that's
that goes
what
back
generates
to what,
what we call authenticity.
Someone, and we know his name. We are happy to know his name. Someone cared enough to make that original Mona Lisa. That's why no printing of it will ever be as valued, and I'm not just talking about money, but just valued as much as the original, so on and on.
I do like the way that you've described and conceptualized what authenticity means. I like that definition. It's a good definition to work with and start playing this game. But I hope it works for our readers,
not reader, but our viewer as well.
Listener, yeah. When I hear that term and I begin interacting with it, to me, it allows for you to play the game at any level that you want. This idea of like meaning and being like really wanting it at that moment, and it kind of creates it. Well, to me, that can kind of be applied to everything. If you want to, you can ascribe a certain sort of beauty to, this might sound strange to some viewers, to capitalism, if you wanted to. And that might make a lot of sense to some people. The idea of somebody picking themselves up by their bootstraps and sort of starting something. Imagine it. Think of that McDonald's that we keep saying is disgusting. I want to unglue us from this one particular perspective and look at it from a different point of view. Think of it like in terms of a guy who worked really, really hard, picked himself up, and finally got enough money, and he's going to work as a manager at this little restaurant that he's building. He's put a lot of heart into it, and he builds it right here. And the time is over for this one building, and so will come another building. And we could talk about, okay, well, objectively speaking, it seems to me that the Sistine Chapel has way more meaning than the McDonald's does. And it's going to sound really strange, because it is very strange. But it's endlessly meaningful for this one person at this moment.
It's actually not that strange because, I mean, take even McDonald's as an example. It is an institution of the American concept of fast food.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an original McDonald's that existed, that people put genuine work, sweat, tears, and logical planning and a good part of their life into creating in the same way that the Sistine Chapel was created. Not to the same scale and intention, obviously.
Think of it like this. People built the Eleusinian mysteries, the ancient temples where people had their gods, whether they be Athena or any of these other statues. I mean, ancient Mesopotamia, I love the history. I love the ancient Mesopotamia and the history therein, whether it be Babylon or the Medes, or I love the Assyrians and the empire, in the empires they built and the temples that they had.
We're talking about ideas that are so ancient, as old as anything we know.
Yes, and think of it like this: those were torn down. They were for Christian and then eventually Islamic art and architecture. The meanings changed. And this is what I think subjectivizes all of this. Because I think you're right, Stephen. I think you're right that life is made up of these things that are meaningful. We interact with meaning. I think you're absolutely right about that. But I think the objects that underlie these things that we call meaningful are themselves subjective, and they change. And just like, the four of us could be really hankering for a dislike from the capitalist or like corporate, maybe not the word capitalist, but the word corporate system that exists with McDonald's, and all they want is this, and like it seems inauthentic, because it is. But at the same time, you can, yeah, exactly. But if you want to look at it as the search for meaning, I'm sure there are plenty of people that work within that corporation. I mean, think of it like this. McDonald's, I remember watching that one movie on Netflix, The Founder. At the very end, there's a little subtitle that pops up. Every day, McDonald's feeds 1% of the world. That's a damn big number. That is a damn big number. And those, essentially what I'm telling you is sort of the creation of a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching reality, nevertheless full of meaning. And in that way, Stephen's absolutely correct. But the object has changed. And just like that, the Sistine Chapel becomes a McDonald's restaurant. Just as an ancient Athenian temple that ascribed its love for Dionysus can suddenly become, well, it's going to sound strange, but a Christian church. And after that, just a nationalist building for the Turks or a McDonald's. But before that, like an Ottoman building that was filled with TNT to serve the nationalists' wants and desires of the Turks during World War I. Right now, I'm talking about the Parthenon. I believe it's that one. Mm-hmm. And it was essentially for a time period full of like weapons used by the Turks during World War I. And that's, in a sense, you could almost look at it as a way of feeding the nationalist desires of that time, which was itself another derived feeling of meaning. And then presupposed before that, it was a Christian Eastern Orthodox church. And then before that, it changes.
Yes,
meaning changes. Trevor, the objects change, but we search for meaning nevertheless.
Right. So I guess at bare minimum, what we could say is that whenever people are allowed to, one way to say it would be freely express. As Americans, we all hold that near and dear. We just do, right? But I'd like to put it another way. When people are allowed to freely compete with and for ideas, that's when we see a nice variety, And unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of variety right now. But now, of course, don't get me wrong. That sounded very spoiled, on the face of it. What I'm saying is that we don't have a lot of variety in our cultural paradigm right now. We are so very fortunate, those of us who live in America, to literally go to the nearest grocery store and have a variety that's impossible in some parts of the world. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking specifically about our cultural institutions and only those institutions. We have a lack of variety. In other words, I've said this often, music was better when ugly people were allowed to make it.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, Brayden, I knew you'd agree. Like, think about it. Every artist that's come up in the last 20 odd years has had to be like this drop dead gorgeous icon, you know, like frickin' Simon off of American Idol could care less about your voice. He wanted to know if you had the ability to be auto-tuned and if you could sell yourself. Like, that was it. That was all he was worried about. And you know, he made millions of dollars off of that idea alone. He could care less if you could actually really truly sing. He could just spot it and so on. But thankfully, I think we are going in a good direction soon. I really do. Think about all these indie artists where it's like, oh, the internet has made it just completely possible for you to publish your own stuff, and you don't have to go through, you know, these truly evil middlemen who like control all the record labels.
Beautiful.
Ugly people are being allowed to make music again, and that's why I think we're getting better.
Sure. And I think that might be a great place to end on account of Tanner being a sleepy East Coast boy.
I think, yeah.
Brayden, any final words?
I do have some final words, and I think for the most part in this episode we covered a lot of architectural aesthetics or things in that area of design, and so maybe next time we can talk more about music and things of that nature, because that's an entirely related conversation that has some quirks of its own. But I'll leave with two things. One is far more serious than the other, and I'll start with the serious one. While we were talking about all of this, and you guys were exchanging words in the last few minutes, I thought of something that I thought may provoke some thought for after the end of this episode, and that is something that's dear to me. I love a good museum. I don't care what it is. If it's a good museum, I love it. The last one I went to was in Chicago, and it was the Institute for Ancient Cultures. Really awesome stuff. Saw some things that were almost 10,000 years old in there, and that really kind of blew my mind. But that being said, think of an everything museum. That is to say, it's a museum that has all sorts of different things, from ancient
a museum of
empires
museums
to right. And inside the Museum of Museums, there is a museum that is the Minimalist Museum. And inside the Minimalist Museum, it is full of minimal things that, for the sake of this analogy, aren't minimal, such as the art movement, where, you know, I'm not saying that somebody can't go sit down and look at a blank canvas and derive meaning from it. But the whole purpose of my argument about complexity versus functionality in relation to minimalism was that these things are almost devoid of any complexity. They exist only for their function and nothing else. Inside this Minimalist Museum are artifacts that exist solely for function, solely for utility. They have no extra meaning or flair added to them. And it sits among all the other museums where there are countless objects imbued with meaning. There are dolls and idols and pots decorated and things with stories at every turn. But not at the Minimalist Museum. Everything exists solely for function, solely for economic purpose, solely, perhaps, as we've mentioned here, to make the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time. I know one museum that I probably won't be stopping off at the Museum of Museums. But maybe that's just me.
And it's the minimalist one.
Because I go to a museum not to, you know, go to the supermarket and see a bunch of things that are designed to make my life easier or quicker or more economical. I go to a museum because I want to know more things about history or the meaning of things or why certain cultures did something. And that's evident through the things that we have thankfully preserved throughout history. Who's going to preserve the brutalist McDonald's? Who wants to go see that? Not
Yeah,
me.
it'll be it would be hyperbolic, but you'd go to the minimalist museum and it would be a big room with nothing in it. It would be like an Amazon warehouse with nothing in it,
Right.
and you know what I mean. And it'd just be like, yep,
And
there it is.
perhaps there's something to that. But this is the only other thing I'll leave with, and it's a meme that I saw online 2 weeks ago because it sums up my entire position. Minimalism is a plot by Big Small to sell more or less. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
God damn it, Brayden. God damn it. All right.
Jesus.
That might be a good place to end. Tanner, do you have anything you would like to say? Or would you like to go to sleep?
Let me think about that.
Fair
Shall I go
enough.
first, Tanner? Would you like?
Sure.
Well, thanks for listening for certain. I'll let Trevor, of course, cast us completely off. But as I always try to say, if you feel like you resonate with any of the ideas we presented here, if you feel like your life is suspiciously devoid of meaning, in other words, something we can all agree on, literally all four of us all agree on, come and join us, and we can help you find some. Good night, my fellow hominids.
So, I guess to close, I mentioned earlier that I have a copy of one of the original Sears and Roebuck catalogs, and I'm sort of just flipping through it. We've lost a lot of artistic expression in a lot of the things we use every day. We have begun valuing form and function, or I should say function over form, more as a people. And it's not my place to say whether that's good or bad. But I would like to close on saying that this loss of the human element, this artistic expression in so many things is a very, very unfortunate consequence of where we are as a society. And I think it speaks volumes to what we value now compared to what we valued previously.
That's a good way to end.
Well said.
And with that, I would say a complete contrary position. That being this, I think all of it's beautiful. All of it. The smallest way of conceptualizing it to the largest. And so are all of you. And I think that might be a cool place to close. All right. Good night, everyone.